The first rays of sunrise stretched across the rolling fields of Ashwood County, covering the farmland in a blanket of golden light. Dew clung to the wheat, birds circled lazily overhead, and the quiet hum of morning drifted through the countryside. Then came the familiar sound everyone recognized. A rusted old tractor rattled down the narrow dirt road, coughing and sputtering with every turn of its worn engine. Its faded green paint had almost disappeared beneath years of dust, and one of its headlights had long since stopped working. Behind the wheel sat 82-year-old Samuel Turner. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel with the same confidence they had carried for more than 60 years. As he drove past the town cafe, several men sitting outside looked up from their coffee. "There goes old Sam," one of them chuckled. "The poorest farmer in the county." Another laughed. "He'd rather drive that museum piece than buy a new tractor." The group erupted in laughter. Across the street, a pair of children climbed onto an old wooden fence and began pretending to steer an imaginary tractor, bouncing wildly as they mimicked its noisy engine. "Look at me," one shouted. "I'm Farmer Sam." The adults laughed even harder. Samuel noticed. He always noticed. But instead of lowering his head, he simply tipped his old hat and continued driving as though the mockery had never reached his ears. By late afternoon, his 3 grown children had arrived at the farmhouse. The old porch creaked beneath their footsteps as they gathered around the kitchen table. Stacks of unpaid property tax notices lay beside worn farm ledgers. Rain leaked through part of the roof. Outside, broken machinery sat untouched near the aging barn. His eldest son sighed heavily. "Dad, this can't go on." His daughter slid a folder across the table. The developers increased their offer again. Samuel glanced at the paperwork but made no effort to open it. His youngest son leaned forward. "They're offering more money than this farm has ever been worth. You could retire comfortably. We could all move on." Samuel looked through the kitchen window toward the distant fields. The land glowed beneath the fading evening sun. For a long moment he said nothing. Then a gentle smile crossed his face. "Some things become more valuable with time." His children exchanged frustrated glances. "Dad," his daughter pleaded, "you're holding on to dirt." "No," Samuel replied softly. "I'm holding on to a promise." Before anyone could ask what he meant, he quietly stood, picked up his hat and walked outside. His answer only deepened their confusion. That evening, after darkness settled across the farm, Samuel climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. Hidden behind an old wooden cabinet rested a heavy oak chest secured by a brass lock polished smooth from years of use. He unlocked it carefully. Inside lay faded maps, yellowed letters, and a thick leather journal whose pages had been filled in neat handwriting over decades. Samuel gently placed the journal inside the chest, locked it once again, and rested his hand on the lid. "It won't be much longer," he whispered. Then he walked downstairs, lifted the old telephone hanging in the hallway, and dialed a number from memory. After 2 rings, a calm voice answered. "Harper Legal Services, this is Michael Harper speaking." Samuel smiled faintly. "It's Samuel Turner." A brief silence followed. "I believe," Samuel said quietly, "it's time we prepared the next envelope." The lawyer's voice grew solemn. "I've been expecting your call." Samuel slowly looked out the window toward the moonlit fields stretching beyond the farmhouse. Somewhere out there, hidden beneath decades of laughter, doubt, and misunderstanding, rested a truth so extraordinary that it would change not only his family's future, but the destiny of the entire town. And not a single person mocking the old farmer had any idea what was waiting beneath their feet. Long before people called him the poorest farmer in Ashwood County, Samuel Turner had been nothing more than a young man with calloused hands, a borrowed shovel, and a dream far bigger than his pocket could afford. The farm that stretched across the valley had not been inherited. It had been earned. Every acre carried the weight of sacrifice. Every fence post had been raised by hands that refused to quit. Samuel and his wife, Eleanor, bought the land shortly after they were married. It wasn't much to look at then: a few neglected fields, a weather-beaten barn ready to collapse, and soil many believed was too exhausted to grow anything worthwhile. Friends told them they were making a mistake. Banks refused to lend them more money. Even relatives suggested they find easier work in the city. But Samuel would simply smile. "Good land doesn't ask for comfort," he often said. "It asks for patience." The early years tested that patience relentlessly. One summer brought the worst drought the county had seen in decades. Crops withered beneath an unforgiving sun, and neighboring farms were forced to sell livestock just to survive. Samuel and Alina survived by working from dawn until long after sunset. When the harvest failed, they took temporary jobs in nearby towns, returning each evening to tend the fields they refused to abandon. Years later, violent floods washed away freshly planted crops and damaged nearly half the property. The little savings they had disappeared almost overnight. Still, they rebuilt. Together. When the tractor finally broke beyond repair, Samuel spent months restoring discarded machinery piece by piece instead of buying something new. When money grew scarce, Alina quietly sold her treasured piano, a wedding gift from her parents, to buy seed for the following season. Samuel protested. She only smiled. "We can always buy another piano. We can't replace another spring." That single harvest became the one that kept the farm alive. As the years passed, their reputation for honesty and hard work spread throughout the county. Developers began visiting, with increasingly generous offers. One company wanted to build luxury homes overlooking the valley. Another proposed a shopping center. Later came an industrial project promising enough money for Samuel and Alina to retire comfortably. The figures grew larger every year. Enough to erase every hardship they had ever faced. Enough to give their children lives of complete financial security. Each time Samuel thanked them politely, then declined. People assumed he was stubborn. Some believed he simply didn't understand how valuable the land had become. Only Alina knew the real reason. Whenever developers left, the two of them would walk together toward the northern edge of the property. There, beyond the orchards and grazing fields, stood an ancient oak tree overlooking a quiet hillside unlike any other part of the farm. Samuel always stopped there. Neither of them spoke very much. Sometimes they simply stood in silence, looking across the untouched ground. One evening, Alina gently slipped her hand into his. "No matter what happens," she whispered, "promise me this place stays exactly as it is." Samuel looked at her with unwavering certainty. "You have my word." She smiled, as though the promise meant far more than anyone else could possibly understand. From that day forward, no crops were planted on that hillside. No buildings were constructed. No machinery was allowed near it. Neighbors often questioned why such fertile land sat unused year after year. Samuel always answered with the same quiet smile. "Not every field is meant to be harvested." People laughed, assuming the old farmer had become sentimental. What they didn't know was that the forgotten corner of the property had never been protected because of farming alone. It guarded a secret that Samuel and Alina had carried together for decades, a secret so important that they had sacrificed comfort, fortune, and even their own reputation to keep it safe. And after Alina's passing, Samuel became its only remaining guardian. After Alina's passing, the farmhouse no longer echoed with quiet laughter or the comforting sound of two people planning tomorrow's work. Only silence remained. Samuel still woke before sunrise, brewed 2 cups of coffee out of habit, and instinctively placed one across the kitchen table before realizing no one would ever reach for it again. He quietly poured the untouched cup into the sink. Then he walked out to the fields. The farm had become more than his home. It had become the last place where he still felt close to the woman who had built it beside him. But while Samuel held tightly to memories, everyone else seemed focused on something very different. Money. Developers returned more frequently than ever before. Their offers no longer arrived in simple envelopes. They came in polished leather folders filled with glossy renderings of luxury neighborhoods, shopping centers, and promises of instant wealth. "Mr. Turner," one executive said with a confident smile, "this is the highest offer we've ever made. You'll never see an opportunity like this again." Samuel glanced at the documents for only a moment before sliding them back across the table. "My answer hasn't changed." The executive sighed in frustration. "You're turning down a fortune." Samuel simply smiled. "Some fortunes can't be counted." The rumors spread quickly through Ashwood County. People gathered outside the cafe each morning, shaking their heads whenever Samuel drove past on his rusted tractor. "He's lost his mind. That farm is falling apart." Imagine saying no to millions. Even old friends tried to persuade him. One afternoon, his lifelong neighbor, Frank Dawson, leaned against the fence separating their properties. "Sam," he said kindly, "you've worked hard enough. Sell the place. Enjoy whatever years you've got left." Samuel looked across the rolling fields. "I already am." Frank couldn't understand the answer. Neither could Samuel's children. Their visits became less frequent, but the arguments became louder. The roof needed repairs. The combine harvester had broken down again. Property taxes climbed higher every year. Every financial report painted the same picture. The farm appeared to be inching toward bankruptcy. "Dad," his eldest son pleaded during one particularly tense evening, "you're protecting land that's becoming worthless." His daughter added, "You're destroying our inheritance." The youngest shook his head. "At this rate, there won't be anything left." Samuel listened quietly. He never interrupted, never defended himself. When they finished speaking, he calmly stood, thanked them for visiting, and walked toward the old barn. His children mistook his silence for stubbornness. They never realized he had heard every word. Inside the barn, hidden behind shelves stacked with dusty tools, stood a small wooden cabinet. Samuel unlocked it with an old brass key. Instead of farm equipment, it contained a compact digital voice recorder and dozens of carefully labeled memory cards. He removed the recorder and replayed the conversation from only moments earlier. Every sentence, every complaint, every argument, every suggestion that the farm be sold. When the recording ended, Samuel wrote the date in his leather journal before placing both the recorder and journal back inside the cabinet. He wasn't gathering evidence out of anger. He wasn't preparing for revenge. He was preserving the truth. The truth of what people chose to say when they believed the old farmer had nothing left to offer. As darkness settled over the fields, Samuel climbed the gentle path toward the isolated northern hill. The ancient oak tree stood silently against the evening sky, its branches swaying in the cool breeze. He rested his weathered hand against its rough bark. "Not much longer," he whispered. Far below, the farmhouse lights flickered to life. His children believed the farm was slowly dying. The town believed Samuel Turner was a foolish old man clinging to a worthless dream. But beneath the peaceful soil, they were so eager to sell lay a secret that had been waiting decades for the right moment to be revealed. And with each passing day, that moment drew closer. Every few months, without telling anyone where he was going, Samuel Turner would leave the farm before sunrise. He always wore the same faded brown jacket Alina had given him years earlier. He carried the same weathered leather satchel tucked carefully beneath his arm. And he always returned before nightfall. The townspeople assumed he was visiting doctors. His children believed he was meeting accountants, desperately trying to save what they considered a failing farm. No one guessed the truth. Samuel was keeping a promise. One rainy autumn morning, his old pickup truck pulled into the parking lot of Harper Legal Services. Michael Harper was already waiting. The two men greeted each other with the quiet familiarity of people who had shared an important secret for many years. "You made good time," Michael said. Samuel smiled. The roads were empty. So was my mind. Inside the lawyer's office, there were no discussions about debts, taxes, or selling land. Instead, Samuel carefully removed several folded maps from his satchel. Each was marked with handwritten notes, dates, and small red circles that highlighted one particular section of the property, the isolated hill beneath the ancient oak tree. Michael spread the maps across the conference table. "You've updated them again." "I had to," Samuel replied. "The land changes. The promise doesn't." Next came a bundle of faded documents tied together with a worn piece of twine. Some were decades-old land surveys. Others were handwritten letters exchanged between Samuel and Alina. There were even notebooks filled with observations recorded year after year. Every page had been preserved with extraordinary care. Michael looked through them slowly. "You've documented everything." Samuel nodded. "If one day I'm not here to explain, these papers will." The lawyer closed the folder gently. "There are still people who would pay anything to get their hands on this information." "I know." "Then why not tell your family?" Samuel remained silent for a long moment. Finally, he looked toward the rain falling against the office window. "Because a secret given too early becomes an opportunity. But a secret revealed at the right time becomes a responsibility." Michael understood exactly what he meant. Years earlier, shortly before Alina passed away, Samuel had made two solemn promises. The first was to her. He would never allow greed to destroy the land they had spent a lifetime protecting. The second promise had been made to someone whose name appeared nowhere in the family records. Someone connected to the history of that forgotten hillside. Someone Samuel never spoke about. Whenever Michael asked questions about that part of the story, Samuel always answered the same way. "When the time comes, they'll know. Nothing more. Nothing less." Their meetings always ended with the same quiet ritual. Samuel took out a blank envelope and carefully placed inside it another handwritten letter. Sometimes it contained memories. Sometimes instructions. Sometimes nothing more than a single page written in his neat, steady handwriting. He sealed the envelope carefully. Across the front he wrote only the date. No names. No explanation. Michael placed it inside a thick confidential file already holding years of sealed envelopes. The file had become so large, it barely fit inside the office safe. Before locking it away, Michael looked at Samuel. "How many are left?" Samuel smiled faintly. "Hopefully only one." As he left the office that afternoon, the rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow across the countryside. Samuel drove home without looking back. He knew time was growing short. The promise he had carried for decades was nearing its final chapter. And somewhere beneath the old oak tree, hidden beneath layers of earth and years of silence, rested the reason he had sacrificed comfort, wealth, and even his own reputation. The town believed they were watching an old man refuse to let go of the past. In reality, they were watching a guardian protect the future. By the time spring arrived, everyone in Ashwood County seemed to be talking about only one thing: Samuel Turner's farm. What had once been dismissed as an old man's stubborn attachment to fading memories had become the most sought-after piece of land in the county. Developers came from neighboring cities with polished shoes, expensive trucks, and contracts worth more money than most families could imagine earning in a lifetime. Each offer was larger than the last. One company proposed building a luxury golf community overlooking the valley. Another promised a state-of-the-art commercial district that would bring the town into the future. The figures written across their contracts were staggering. Enough to buy Samuel a beautiful home anywhere he wanted. Enough to provide financial security for his children and grandchildren for generations. Enough to make almost anyone say yes. But Samuel never did. One afternoon, a developer placed the newest contract on the farmhouse kitchen table. "This is our final offer," he said confidently. "You'll never receive more than this." Samuel adjusted his reading glasses and slowly examined the papers. He didn't react to the number. He simply closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. "I'm sorry." The land isn't for sale. The developer leaned back in disbelief. Mr. Turner, do you even realize what you're refusing? Samuel smiled politely. I know exactly what I'm protecting. The visitor left frustrated, unable to understand how anyone could walk away from such a fortune. Word spread through town within hours. At the cafe, neighbors shook their heads. He's gone completely crazy. Imagine turning down that kind of money. My grandfather would have sold before the ink dried. Even people who once admired Samuel began questioning his judgment. Frank Dawson visited again, hoping one last conversation might change his old friend's mind. Sam, he said gently, you've spent your whole life working. Don't you think you've earned the right to rest? Samuel looked across the fields glowing beneath the afternoon sun. I already have. Frank frowned. What about your family? They're counting on this inheritance. Samuel remained silent. He knew they weren't counting on the land. They were counting on what they believed it could buy. His children certainly were. That weekend they gathered once more inside the aging farmhouse. The atmosphere was tense before anyone spoke. The eldest son placed another appraisal report on the table. Dad, this property is worth more than ever. His daughter crossed her arms. Every month you refuse, you're risking everything. What if taxes keep rising? What if another storm destroys the barn? The youngest son sighed heavily. You're throwing away our future. Samuel listened quietly, his weathered hands resting on the worn oak table he and Alina had built decades earlier. When the room finally fell silent, he stood and walked toward the front door. I need some air. No one followed him. They assumed he was avoiding another argument. Instead, Samuel made his way along a narrow trail leading toward the northern edge of the farm. The path wound through tall grass until it reached the ancient oak tree standing alone atop the quiet hillside. Unlike the rest of the property, this corner remained untouched. No crops. No fences. No machinery. Only wildflowers dancing gently in the breeze. Samuel knelt beside the massive trunk. At its base rested a small stone marker almost completely hidden beneath moss and fallen leaves. He carefully cleared away the debris before placing a bouquet of fresh white lilies against the stone. For several moments he simply stood there in silence. The wind whispered softly through the branches above. I kept my promise, he murmured. And I will until the very end. His eyes drifted across the hillside. There was no visible treasure. No sign explaining why this forgotten corner mattered more than millions of dollars. Yet something about the place felt different. Almost sacred. As the sun disappeared below the horizon, Samuel turned and slowly walked back toward the farmhouse. High above him, the ancient oak swayed gently in the evening breeze, guarding its secret as faithfully as the old farmer who had spent a lifetime protecting it. Whatever answer everyone had been searching for, it wasn't hidden inside the farmhouse. It wasn't written in the developer's contracts. It was waiting beneath that lonely hill where a promise had been kept for decades, and where the truth was growing closer to being uncovered with every passing day. Summer arrived with fields of golden wheat stretching to the horizon. It should have been Samuel Turner's favorite time of year. For more than 60 years, harvest season had filled the farm with the sound of tractors, laughter, and long days that always ended with tired smiles. But this year was different. Samuel no longer walked the fields with the same steady stride. The simple climb to the old barn left him short of breath. His weathered hands, once strong enough to lift heavy grain sacks without effort, now trembled as he gripped the fence surrounding the pasture. The doctor was honest. Your heart has grown weaker. We can make you comfortable, Samuel. But you need to prepare. Samuel accepted the news with the same quiet dignity that had carried him through every storm, drought, and failed harvest. He had never feared death. He feared only one thing: leaving before his promise was fulfilled. A week later, he drove to Harper Legal Services for what both men silently knew would be their final meeting. Michael Harper greeted him with unusual concern. You look tired. Samuel smiled. I've had a long life. I can't complain. Inside the office, Samuel placed a thick brown package on the conference table. Unlike the previous envelopes, this one was wrapped carefully in heavy paper and sealed with dark red wax. Across the front, written in his familiar handwriting, were just 8 words. Only after everyone has made their choice. Michael looked at the package without touching it. Is this the last one? Samuel nodded. It contains everything they'll need. The journals, the maps, the letters, and the truth. Michael hesitated. Are you sure you don't want to tell your family yourself? Samuel looked toward the office window, where the afternoon sun illuminated the distant countryside. If I tell them now, he said softly, they'll hear my words. He paused before continuing. I need them to understand their own. Michael understood. The choice Samuel wanted his family to remember wasn't whether to keep the farm. It was the choice they had already been making for years, what they valued most. Without another word, Michael placed the sealed package inside the confidential file, locking it safely away. As Samuel stood to leave, the lawyer extended his hand. Instead, Samuel embraced him like an old friend. Thank you, he whispered, for helping me keep my promise. Michael watched from the office window as Samuel's old pickup disappeared down the country road. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was the last time he would ever see the old farmer alive. 3 weeks later, the call came. Samuel Turner had passed away peacefully in his sleep, his hands resting upon the same leather journal that had accompanied him through decades of sacrifice. The town gathered for his funeral. Farmers who had worked beside him. Neighbors who had once laughed at his worn-out tractor. Former classmates. Old friends. Even several developers attended quietly, removing their hats as his casket was carried into the small country church. The minister spoke about a man whose wealth had never been measured by possessions. He planted hope where others saw failure. He kept promises when keeping them cost him everything. Outside the church, conversations drifted through the crowd. I never understood why he stayed. I thought he was just too stubborn to let go. Maybe we judged him too quickly. For the first time, even those who had mocked Samuel questioned whether they had truly known the man at all. His children stood together, accepting condolences with respectful silence. But before the afternoon had ended, reality began pulling them in another direction. What happens to the farm now? The eldest son asked quietly. His sister sighed. We should probably contact the developers. They'll still be interested. The youngest nodded. There's no reason to keep waiting anymore. None of them noticed Michael Harper standing a few steps away. He heard every word. But he said nothing. Not yet. Because inside his office, locked safely behind steel doors, rested Samuel's final package. And written across its seal was the condition that would decide everything. Only after everyone has made their choice. The harvest Samuel had spent a lifetime preparing was no longer growing in the fields. It was growing in the hearts of those who had yet to discover the extraordinary truth hidden beneath the land they were already preparing to sell. 7 days after Samuel Turner's funeral, the atmosphere inside Harper Legal Services felt heavier than anyone expected. His 3 children arrived early. They assumed the meeting would be simple. Read the will. Sign a few papers. Accept the highest offer from the developers. Sell the farm. Move on. Outside the office, 3 black luxury SUVs sat parked along the curb. The development companies had wasted no time. Every representative believed the old farmer's death had finally removed the only obstacle standing between them and the valuable property. Some had already prepared revised contracts with even higher offers. Others quietly discussed how quickly construction could begin. To them, the farm's future had already been decided. Inside the conference room, Michael Harper entered carrying the same thick confidential file Samuel had spent years building. He placed it carefully on the table but made no attempt to open it. Instead, he unfolded a single sheet of paper. This, he said calmly, contains the first instruction in your father's final wishes. The eldest son leaned forward. Can we finally discuss the estate? Michael shook his head. Not yet. Confused glances filled the room. Your father left one condition that must be honored before any part of his estate can be distributed. The daughter frowned. What condition? Michael adjusted his glasses and read directly from Samuel's handwritten instructions. For 30 days following my passing, no portion of the farm shall be sold. He paused before continuing. No machinery shall be removed from the property. Another pause. No excavation, construction, or alteration of the land shall begin under any circumstance. Silence settled over the room. The youngest son blinked in disbelief. That's it. That's what we've been called here for. Michael nodded. These instructions are legally binding. The eldest son rubbed his forehead. This makes no sense. The developers are ready to buy now. My father knew that, Michael replied. He wrote these instructions specifically because he knew. The daughter crossed her arms. So we're expected to let the farm sit there doing nothing for an entire month. Yes. And if someone ignores these instructions? Michael looked each of them in the eye. Your father anticipated that question. He slid another document across the table. It clearly stated that violating the 30-day condition would immediately disqualify the responsible heir from receiving any benefit under the estate plan. No one spoke. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Outside, the developers grew impatient. Within days, phone calls began arriving. Has the family made a decision? We're prepared to increase our offer. Our investors won't wait forever. The children repeated the same answer every time. We're not allowed to sell. Word spread through Ashwood County faster than anyone expected. People gathered outside the cafe, trading theories over steaming cups of coffee. Maybe the old man hid cash somewhere. I heard there's unpaid debt buried under that farm. My cousin says the government is involved. Each rumor became more unbelievable than the last. Even longtime neighbors began driving past the property, hoping to notice something unusual. But nothing changed. The old farmhouse stood quietly beneath the morning sun. The rusted tractor remained parked beside the weathered barn. The ancient oak tree still watched over the lonely northern hill. Everything appeared exactly as Samuel had left it. Yet beneath that calm surface, anticipation continued to grow. Every passing day brought the family one step closer to the end of the 30-day countdown. And inside Michael Harper's office, the confidential file remained locked away. Within it rested the maps, journals, wartime records, geological surveys, and the final letter Samuel had spent decades protecting. Michael glanced at the safe before leaving his office that evening. He knew the strange 30-day delay had never been about postponing an inheritance. It was about ensuring that when the truth finally emerged, no one could claim they had acted too soon or for the wrong reasons. Because in just a few more weeks, the forgotten farmer everyone had laughed at would reveal why he had spent an entire lifetime protecting a piece of land the world believed was worthless. And Ashwood County would never look at those quiet fields the same way again. The 30th morning arrived beneath a sky as clear as crystal. For the Turner family, the past month had felt longer than the previous year combined. The developers had called almost every day. Rumors had spread through every corner of Ashwood County. Some claimed Samuel had hidden stacks of cash somewhere on the farm. Others believed the government was about to seize the land. A few insisted the old farmer had simply wanted one final chance to control his family from beyond the grave. None of them came close to the truth. At precisely 10 o'clock, Samuel's children walked into Michael Harper's office. The thick confidential file rested in the center of the conference table. For a moment no one spoke. Michael slowly unlocked the brass clasp securing the file. This, he said quietly, is what your father spent decades protecting. Instead of a will, he carefully removed several aged folders, rolled maps, handwritten journals, and a stack of official government documents whose edges had turned yellow with time. The eldest son frowned. "What exactly are we looking at?" "The answer," Michael replied. He unfolded the first document. It was an old geological survey, dated more than 40 years earlier. Across one section of Samuel's property, several markings had been circled in red. The daughter leaned closer. "What does this mean?" Michael looked at each of them before answering. During a routine water survey decades ago, specialists discovered evidence of an exceptionally rare natural resource beneath the northern section of your father's land. The room fell silent. It wasn't confirmed publicly because environmental regulations and ownership protections were still being developed. If news had leaked back then, mining companies and speculators would have stripped this valley bare before proper safeguards existed. He opened another folder. Inside were confidential correspondence, environmental reports, and legal opinions spanning decades. Every document told the same story. Experts had repeatedly advised Samuel to keep the discovery private until strong conservation laws could protect the land from reckless exploitation. He had every opportunity to become wealthy overnight, Michael continued. But doing so would have destroyed the land forever. The youngest son stared at the papers. So he chose to stay poor. Michael shook his head. No. He chose patience. Another document emerged from the file. It contained wartime records from decades earlier. During military engineering work in the region, government specialists had documented unusual mineral formations beneath Samuel's hillside. Those records had later supported the geological findings but remained restricted for years. Samuel had legally obtained copies only after spending decades navigating government archives and property records. He understood something few others did. The land's true value would not come from selling it quickly. It would come from protecting it until it could benefit generations instead of enriching a handful of speculators. Michael then opened Samuel's leather journal. A single passage had been marked with a ribbon. He began reading aloud. "People think I'm refusing money because I'm stubborn. The truth is, I refuse because some wealth should never belong to the first person willing to destroy what creates it." The room grew painfully quiet. He turned another page. "If I sell today, strangers will take everything beneath this hill and leave nothing behind but empty ground. If I wait, the land can provide opportunity without losing its soul." Tears welled in the daughter's eyes. Every argument, every accusation, every time they had begged him to sell. Suddenly, those memories became almost unbearable. Michael carefully unrolled the final map. Unlike the others, it contained modern survey results completed only months before Samuel's death. The protected resource had now been officially verified. Its estimated value reached into the millions. But attached to the report was another document. A legally approved conservation agreement. Rather than allowing uncontrolled extraction, the resource would be managed under strict environmental protections, ensuring that the surrounding farmland, wildlife, and historic landscape would remain preserved while its benefits were shared responsibly for decades. Samuel had waited exactly long enough. Not a year longer. Not a year sooner. Everything he had endured, the laughter, the insults, the endless pressure to sell, had been part of protecting that moment. Michael slowly closed the journal. Your father wasn't guarding a fortune. He was guarding its future. The same neighbors who had mocked his rusted tractor. The same developers who believed he was an obstacle. Even his own children who thought he was clinging to worthless land had misunderstood him completely. Samuel Turner had never been the poorest farmer in Ashwood County. He had been its wisest guardian. And the forgotten hillside beneath the ancient oak tree, the place everyone dismissed as useless, had become one of the most valuable pieces of land in the entire region. Yet as astonishing as the discovery was, Michael looked toward the remaining unopened folder and quietly said, If you think this is the greatest part of your father's legacy. He rested his hand upon the final sealed documents. Then you still don't know Samuel Turner. No one spoke after Michael Harper closed the geological reports. The room remained perfectly still. For years, Samuel Turner's children had believed their father was sacrificing his future because he was too stubborn to let go of the past. Now they realized he had been protecting a future none of them could even imagine. But Michael wasn't finished. He reached for the final folder inside the confidential file. This, he said quietly, is the part your father considered more important than the discovery itself. He untied the faded ribbon securing the documents. Inside were Samuel's final journals, legal instructions, trust agreements, investment records, and a handwritten letter addressed simply. To my family. Michael placed the letter aside for a moment. There is something you need to understand first. He opened several financial statements. Your father never spent the last 40 years waiting for this land to make him wealthy. He built his own financial security long before today. The eldest son frowned. What do you mean? Michael slid the documents across the table. After every successful harvest, Samuel had invested a small portion of his earnings. Never recklessly. Never chasing quick profits. He purchased conservative investments, leased small neighboring fields, and reinvested every return. Even during difficult years, he refused to touch those savings unless someone else needed help. He lived modestly by choice, Michael explained. Not because he had to. The daughter stared at the figures in disbelief. So he could have bought a new tractor. Years ago, Michael replied. He could have renovated the farmhouse. He could have retired comfortably. But he believed comfort should never replace purpose. Michael then unfolded the estate plan. Samuel's signature appeared at the bottom of every page. Your father's wishes are legally binding. He began reading. The northern hillside surrounding the ancient oak tree would never be privately developed. Instead, it would become the heart of the Turner Conservation Trust, permanently protecting the land, its wildlife, and the valuable natural resource beneath it. Any future use of the resource would follow strict environmental safeguards, with independent oversight to ensure the land could never be stripped for short-term profit. Samuel had waited decades to prevent exactly that. The second provision established annual scholarships for children from hardworking farming families throughout Ashwood County. Students studying agriculture, environmental science, and land conservation would receive financial support for generations. He wanted young people, Michael said, to understand that land is something we borrow from the future, not something we consume today. The third provision transformed the old Turner farmhouse into a community heritage center. Its rooms would preserve Samuel and Aliner's journals, photographs, farming tools, and handwritten lessons so future generations could learn the history of the valley and the values that built it. The farmhouse everyone had called worthless would become a place where the town remembered its roots. Finally, Michael reached the last section. The remaining estate. He paused. Will be distributed equally among my heirs only if they agree to honor every condition of this trust. The eldest son looked up. And if we don't? Michael quietly turned the page. If any heir challenges or violates these protections, that person's share will be redirected to the Turner Conservation Trust. Silence filled the room. Samuel had never used his wealth to control his family. He had used it to protect what mattered most. Only after safeguarding the land, supporting future farmers, and preserving the family's legacy had he considered personal inheritance. Michael finally picked up Samuel's handwritten letter. He unfolded it carefully. If you're reading this, then you've learned what I hoped the land would teach before money ever could. He continued. Wealth can build houses, buy machines, and fill bank accounts. But it cannot restore a forest once it's destroyed, rebuild trust once it's broken, or replace a promise once it's forgotten. The daughter wiped tears from her eyes. Michael read the final lines. I never wanted to leave you the richest land in the county. I wanted to leave you worthy of caring for it. If you protect this farm together, it will provide for countless families long after all of us are gone. That is the inheritance I prayed you would choose." When the letter ended, no one reached for the financial statements. No one asked how much their shares were worth. Those questions suddenly felt insignificant. For the first time, they understood that Samuel Turner's greatest fortune had never been hidden beneath the hillside. It had been hidden within the responsibility he spent a lifetime preparing them to receive. His legacy was not measured in millions. It was measured in the courage to protect tomorrow, even when the world laughed at you for refusing today's easy reward. The news spread through Ashwood County before the sun had even set. By the following morning, every newspaper carried the same headline. Farmer once called county's poorest protected land worth millions. Television crews parked along the dirt road leading to the Turner farm. Reporters stood in front of the weathered farmhouse describing the remarkable story of the elderly farmer who had refused fortune after fortune, not because he was foolish, but because he understood the true value hidden beneath his land. The same rusted tractor people had laughed at for years now appeared on front pages across the region. It was no longer a symbol of poverty. It had become a symbol of patience. Outside the town cafe where so many jokes about Samuel had begun, the atmosphere felt different. The usual laughter had disappeared. The men who once mocked him sat quietly, staring into their coffee cups. Frank Dawson finally broke the silence. "I spent years trying to convince Sam to sell." He sighed deeply. Turns out he understood more than all of us put together. No one argued. Across town, the children who used to imitate Samuel driving his old tractor asked their parents why everyone was suddenly calling him a hero. Few adults knew how to answer. Because the truth was uncomfortable. They had judged a man without ever trying to understand him. Developers who had confidently expected to own the property withdrew their proposals one after another. The conservation agreement made it clear that the northern hillside and everything beneath it would never become another commercial project. Some executives expressed disappointment. Others admitted privately that Samuel had made the wiser choice. Protecting the land had ultimately created far greater value than exploiting it ever could. At the farmhouse, Samuel's children walked through rooms that suddenly felt very different. Every corner held a memory they had once overlooked. The old kitchen table where their parents had planned each harvest. The worn boots still resting beside the back door. The faded family photographs lining the hallway. They realized they had spent years seeing only peeling paint, broken machinery, and unpaid bills. They had completely missed the life those walls represented. The eldest son wandered into the barn. There, beneath a dusty workbench, he found the old digital recorder his father had used. Curious, he pressed play. The room filled with familiar voices. His own voice. His sister's voices. Conversations they barely remembered. Arguments about selling the farm. Complaints about property taxes. Frustration over the aging machinery. Then came Samuel's voice. Calm. Patient. Never once angry. Never once insulting them. He simply listened. The recording ended. The silence that followed was unbearable. The eldest son slowly sat down on an overturned bucket, covering his face with trembling hands. "I never heard him," he whispered. "I only heard myself." That evening, the three siblings gathered beneath the ancient oak tree for the first time since childhood. Fresh flowers still rested beside the old stone marker Samuel had visited so faithfully. The wind moved gently through the branches above them. No one spoke for several minutes. Finally, the youngest daughter broke the silence. "We spent years trying to convince him to abandon the one thing that would protect all of us." Her sister wiped away a tear. "And he never stopped loving us." The eldest son looked across the fields glowing beneath the setting sun. "He could have proved us wrong at any time. But he chose to let the truth teach us instead." For the first time, they understood why their father had never argued. He had known that victory won through pride would never change their hearts. Only truth could do that. As the evening shadows stretched across the farm, the town slowly began to rewrite the story it had told about Samuel Turner. He was no longer remembered as the stubborn old farmer who refused easy money. He was remembered as the man who saw value where everyone else saw failure, the guardian who protected tomorrow while others chased today. And in the end, justice arrived exactly as Samuel had hoped. Not through revenge, not through humiliation, but through a truth so undeniable that an entire town was forced to confront the cost of judging a man they had never truly known. The months that followed marked the beginning of a new chapter, not only for the Turner family but for all of Ashwood County. The old farm, once dismissed as a forgotten patch of land destined for demolition, slowly became a place of purpose. People no longer drove past it with pity. They came with respect. The weathered farmhouse was carefully restored, not to erase the marks of time, but to preserve them. Every repaired floorboard, every restored window, and every photograph hanging on its walls told the story of two ordinary people who had lived extraordinary lives through patience, sacrifice, and unwavering integrity. Above the front entrance, a simple wooden sign was placed: the Samuel and Alina Turner Heritage Farm. Inside, visitors walked through rooms filled with history. Samuel's faded hats rested beside his work gloves. His old leather boots still stood near the back door. The rusted tractor that had once been the subject of endless jokes now occupied a place of honor inside a newly built exhibit barn. Children climbed onto a carefully preserved replica while volunteers shared stories about the farmer who refused to measure success by appearances. In another room, Samuel's journals were displayed behind protective glass. Page after page revealed not the thoughts of a wealthy landowner, but the heart of a humble man who believed every season carried a lesson. Schools soon began organizing field trips to the farm. Young students listened as local historians explained how Samuel had protected the land for decades, even when almost everyone believed he was making the greatest mistake of his life. Agricultural colleges partnered with the Turner Conservation Trust, using the protected hillside as a living classroom. Future farmers learned about responsible land stewardship, environmental conservation, and the importance of thinking beyond immediate profit. Standing beneath the ancient oak tree, many of them realized that true success was measured not by what a person could take from the land, but by what they chose to leave behind. The scholarship Samuel established also began changing lives. Every year, hardworking students from farming families received opportunities their parents could only dream of. Many returned after graduation, bringing modern knowledge back to the communities that had raised them. Some developed sustainable farming techniques. Others became environmental scientists, conservation officers, and agricultural educators. Each of them carried a small part of Samuel's legacy into the future. His own family changed as well. The bitterness that had once divided them slowly gave way to understanding. The eldest son took responsibility for managing the heritage farm, ensuring every decision honored his father's vision instead of chasing quick profits. His daughter dedicated countless hours to organizing educational programs and preserving the family's history. The youngest son worked alongside conservation experts, helping protect the very hillside he had once wanted to sell. None of them believed these efforts erased the painful words they had spoken. Some regrets could never be undone. But every act of service became a quiet promise that their father's sacrifices would never again be taken for granted. Before long, the people of Ashwood County stopped referring to the property as the Old Turner Farm. They simply called it the farm that waited. A place where patience defeated greed, where wisdom outlasted ridicule, and where one quiet farmer proved that the greatest treasures are often protected not by powerful people, but by ordinary men and women with extraordinary character. At long last, Samuel Turner's reputation had been fully restored. not because millions had been discovered beneath his land, but because the world finally understood the kind of man he had been all along. A year after Samuel Turner's passing, the sun rose over Ashwood County just as it had every morning for generations. Golden light rolled across the fields. The wheat swayed gently in the breeze. Morning birds circled above the ancient oak tree standing proudly on the northern hill, its branches reaching toward the sky like silent guardians of a promise finally fulfilled. Nothing about the landscape seemed extraordinary. Yet everything had changed. The farm no longer echoed with loneliness. Children's laughter drifted across the fields as a school group arrived for another educational visit. Young farmers examined the rich soil, learning how careful stewardship could preserve both the land and the future. Visitors wandered through the heritage farmhouse, pausing before Samuel's weathered hat, his faded photographs, and the leather journal that had quietly changed an entire town. The man once dismissed as stubborn had become a symbol of wisdom. That morning, Samuel's eldest grandchild walked slowly toward the old oak tree. In his hands rested the final journal his grandfather had written. Its leather cover had grown softer with age, its pages filled with decades of careful observations, hopes, disappointments, and lessons earned through honest work. He stopped beside the stone marker where Samuel had so often placed fresh flowers. For a moment, he simply looked across the peaceful valley. The same fields his grandfather had plowed. The same hills people had once called worthless. The same horizon Samuel had trusted, even when no one else believed. He opened the journal to its final page. The familiar handwriting seemed almost alive. Taking a slow breath, he read aloud. Never measure land by today's price. He paused, allowing the words to settle into the quiet morning. Then he continued. Measure it by tomorrow's purpose. The breeze carried the sentence across the fields. Nearby, a group of students stopped talking. Even they seemed to sense the importance of those simple words. Samuel had never believed land existed merely to be bought and sold. To him, every acre carried a responsibility. Every harvest represented hope. Every season reminded people that patience always asks for faith before it offers rewards. His greatest lesson had never been about hidden wealth. It had been about hidden vision. The world had looked at an aging farmer driving a rusted tractor and seen failure. Samuel had looked at the same fields and seen tomorrow. The world had measured success by quick profit. He had measured it by lasting purpose. The world had laughed because they saw only what stood above the ground. He protected what rested beneath it, and even more importantly, what could grow because of it. His grandchildren would inherit more than land. They would inherit a way of thinking. To value integrity over convenience. Responsibility over entitlement. Patience over greed. And character over reputation. Because reputations are shaped by what people believe today. Character is revealed by what time eventually proves to be true. As the morning sun climbed higher, the camera of memory seemed to sweep across the valley. The restored farmhouse. The carefully protected hillside. The scholarship students walking through the fields. The Heritage Center preserving the county's history. The ancient oak tree standing exactly where Samuel had promised it always would. It no longer looked like forgotten farmland. It looked like a living testament to one man's courage to protect the future while everyone else chased the present. The greatest treasure had never been the valuable resource hidden beneath the earth. It was the wisdom of the man who refused to sacrifice tomorrow for today's applause. Samuel Turner never lived to hear the town apologize. He never saw the headlines praising his foresight. He never watched children learn from the journals he spent a lifetime writing. Yet somehow none of that mattered. Because he had accomplished something far greater. He left the world better than he found it. And perhaps that is the truest measure of a life well lived. So the next time you see someone living simply, the next time you meet a person the world has underestimated, the next time patience looks like failure and quiet conviction looks like stubbornness, remember Samuel Turner. Because history has a remarkable way of revealing that the people others laugh at today are sometimes the very people protecting tomorrow. And in the end, the world's greatest treasures are rarely guarded by the loudest voices. They are protected by humble hearts that understand one timeless truth. Some things become more valuable with time.